So I'll pick up where I left off. So this is in effect what IR theory is designed to do. It's an attempt to try to figure out the nature of the international system so that we can understand the particular kind of problems we face so we can better align things, right? But what's really important here is really stressing this idea that this is what we did, right? We're talking about and clarifying this, right? We're talking about the nature of the problem. We're talking about how we should respond as a result. And we're talking about how to align resources and prioritize at the policy level. I think that Marcy and I operated largely in terms of A and B, while Claudia made sure that we got to C, right? Now, what I wanted to point out is the debate that emerged in the discussion forum really shouldn't be read as what the answer is to the question, but it actually gets at the idea that this is an incredibly complicated question, and the one that me and analysts have to actually analyze and create a rigorous argument to understand. So Marcy and I were both trying to get at the terms on which we could expect effective alignment of efforts to the nature of climate change. And I think that her analysis was pretty emblematic of how we do that, right? She focused on the effect of climate change on the security of people, and she uses the psychological security framework of Maslow as a starting point. So to go back from a couple slides ago, what Maslow does for Marcy's argument is it fills in the emptiness of security as a general word that floats around in our world, right? So for Marcy, it means the psychological security as understood by Maslow and how that relates out to other parts of life. What I thought was really interesting is that's a fundamental alternative to what McDonald's arguing. He's using the concept of ecology in the same way. He's trying to use a different framework so that we can build out and clarify what we need to address. Now, I disagree with that, right? I argued, more or less in keeping with McDonald, that actually smuggles in a state-centered focus. It's all about the state doing things, right? Protecting people, like doing specific kinds of things. That actually doesn't get at the core nature of the problem. Now, what's important here is, as I said, climate is a concept that we're still developing. So what actually happens here is this healthy agreement allows us to work through the key elements of the problem and force both of us to clarify, right? I think that's really, really essential. Now, why does all that matter? Because this kind of debate is not dissimilar to what it looks like to write policy, right? What we need to do is we need to make sure we've correctly formatted the problem. Then we need to see if our framework for that problem aligns our efforts in the right way. If they don't, or if our efforts aren't aligned already, we need to identify the obstacles to that alignment and work to make that alignment more possible. Note that, unfortunately, we're political scientists, so we have to be a little bit cynical. We need to account for power when we do this, right? Not just morality. And think about success in terms of degree, right? This is exactly what Claudia gets at in her posts, right? Her discussion about how we think about and integrate climate change into the national security apparatus was really getting at this idea of, well, this is how we could align these resources if we adopted the right perspective. All I would point out is that Claudia's focus on threat enhancement and so on and so forth could equally be subjected to the same sort of critical analysis. But why I wanted to stress all this is what a white paper is supposed to do, right? White paper can have lots of uses in government, but one is to frame a problem and hopefully at least begin a conversation about how to align resources and effort, convince different actors across the government to adopt a perspective that's largely or mostly consistent with this perspective so that we can actually align those resources effectively to the nature of the problem. Now, one of the things is that the US government is so complex that this process actually is sort of politics within politics, right? Each of the various bureaucratic organizations have their own ways of thinking and action, which may not reconcile themselves. This is borne out in the complexity of what's called the interagency process, which has its roots in the Reagan administration. It's in the 1980s where various kinds of problems, specifically international cartel smuggling drugs, made it so that government bodies that used to be able to operate independently of themselves had to organize their efforts. This was incredibly difficult for lots of different reasons that range from bureaucratic politics to resourcing politics to even just the fundamental way in which the people who work in these different bodies think about the world. I point this out because this is precisely managing the interagency process is what's usually done through these kind of strategic documents. The other day I was listening to a podcast of the Undersecretary of Planning. She has a longer title than that in the Biden administration in the Defense Department. And she was making the point about the National Defense Strategy and about how the document itself doesn't actually create strategy or meaningful way. What it does is it tries to align different actors across the Department of Defense to a very particular direction so that when they make decisions within their own prerogative, that they do so in ways that will more or less get us to operate in a direction that is the most conducive to our national security. We did this well in the past on key issues, right? But it's become less common. Um, Now, what I wanted to point out is the reasons for that is that most of the time when you read these texts, they'll point to the obstacles, right, that prevent the government from responding to the option, the problem in the correct way. It might be because we've conceptualized it the wrong way. It might be because the interagency process hasn't been properly led. It might be because it is being properly led, but we don't have the right strategic narrative in order to align them. There's different infighting and so on and so forth. Or there are other sort of legal, political obstacles in the way. My point is like don't make the category mistake of eating the menu instead of the meal, right? Don't mistake the obstacles for the problem itself, and don't conflate fixing an obstacle with realizing strategy. This is actually a fundamental mistake, and it's one that we see a lot in political debate and in larger domestic debate, right? Most of the time, we mistake obstacles or problems and overcoming them with thinking strategically, and they're not the same thing, right? So all of this is to say, I think what the last week's forums really get at are how we can put these things in train and begin to analyze a problem and work out from these conceptual discussions, these seemingly maybe really theoretical discussions, to where we actually start biting into the actual nature of our response to the international environment or problems like climate change. So really excited about that. I've already taken a lot of your time, so I'm not going to keep talking. If you have any issues about the white paper, we'll cover them on the Wednesday night call tomorrow night, or you're more than welcome to send me a message or phone into my office hours. Hope you have a great afternoon.